Every town has a dark side. It was a warm November day when 8-year-old Tammy Belanger left her house to do the same short walk to school she'd done many times before. A few doors down, neighbor Betty Blunt, she glanced out her kitchen window and spotted Tammy skipping across the street. It was 8 a.m. in a quiet New England town of just 13,000. 8-year-old Tammy Belanger never made it to her third grade classroom on Lincoln Street. Somewhere around 8 a.m. on November 13, 1984, in the 1-mile walk from her home on River Street, she vanished. But without realizing it, Betty had just witnessed the last moments anyone would ever see of Tammy ever again, because someone else was out there that morning watching, waiting, and hunting. By the time the school day ended, Exeter, New Hampshire will be living in a nightmare that still haunts it 40 years later. Hey guys, it's Andrew. Welcome to another episode of Every Town, where today we're going into a case that's about as frustrating as they come, because just about everyone knows who took Tammy. Problem is, nobody can prove it, and when you hear the details of this guy, you're going to feel a rage build up inside you. So, let's head over to Exeter now and explore the disappearance of Tammy Belanger. Exeter, New Hampshire sits along the banks of the Squamscott River about an hour north of Boston. Founded in 1638, it's one of New England's oldest towns, with colonial homes, cobblestone sidewalks, and a town square that looks like it's been plucked from a Hallmark movie. It's home to Phillips Exeter Academy, one of the most prestigious prep schools in the entire country, a close-knit community where the people wave when you walk on by, and kids ride their bikes down quiet tree-lined streets. It doesn't just feel safe, it is safe, which is why what happened in the fall of '84 here stings all that much harder. Born on February 24th of 1976, Tammy was raised here. She was the youngest of 3 children and grew up in a very normal, very typical suburban home. Her mom, Patricia, worked in administration at Exeter Hospital's emergency room, while their father, Nelson, supervised production at the local waterworks in nearby Hampton, and they lived on River Street in a neighborhood where everyone knew one another. Tammy was shy, quiet, and all-around good kid, and in 1984, when she was 8 years old, when she disappeared, Tammy stood 4 feet 6 and tall, weighed about 70 pounds, and had long brown hair with those distinctive bangs carved straight across her forehead. Her left eye wandered slightly outward from an old injury, giving her a unique look that made her instantly recognizable to anyone who saw her. She was the kind of child who followed routines. Every morning she'd be up early, eat breakfast, and leave for school right on time. No dilly-dallying, as her father would later tell reporters. The Lincoln Street School was less than a mile from her house, 20-minute walk that she'd been making since first grade. Under the school policy here, kids who live within 2 miles didn't get bus service. They were expected to walk or get a ride from their parents. Another thing about hers, that she really wasn't the type of kid who would talk to strangers. I mean, she barely talked to people she knew, not in a negative way, just a shy 8-year-old, which is normal, and she was cautious, and everyone who knew her insisted she would never willingly go with someone, not even someone she recognized from the neighborhood, which means that if somebody approached her, which we think is exactly what happened, it didn't play out like you might think it would or have seen in movies. The man in the car didn't chat her up and offer a ride. There was little to no back and forth, and likely what happened was they jumped out, grabbed little Tammy, and threw her in the car all in under a minute. That Tuesday morning, November 13th, Tammy got dressed in her usual fall attire, an aqua shirt with black and white stripes, purple sweater, a tan jacket over that with blue sleeves. She had tan corduroy pants and suede shoes, and green and blue socks. She grabbed her red backpack, the one with her name and address clearly written on it, and headed out the door around 8 o'clock. The walk to school would have taken her down familiar streets, past houses she walked by every single day, But instead of the normal routine, somewhere between her front door and the school's front entrance, well, Tammy simply vanished. Since this is 1984 we're talking about, she was not heard from for a few hours. And back then, schools didn't call home when students were absent. There were no automated systems or concerned secretaries checking on missing children. If a kid didn't show up, it was simply noted in the attendance book, then forgotten. So, when Tammy failed to arrive at Lincoln Street School that morning, nobody thought to pick up the phone, and no one wondered where the quiet girl with the wandering eye might be. That school day continued on normally, while somewhere out there, the 8-year-old was utterly terrified. It wasn't until 3:30 that afternoon, when Tammy hadn't returned home from school, that her mother finally called the school to check on her. No, the school secretary told her Tammy wasn't still there, and in fact, she had been marked absent the entire day. So, 7.5 precious hours had passed, hours during which a trail could have been followed, witnesses could have been fresh in their memories, evidence could have been preserved. Instead, the golden window for finding a missing child, those crucial first hours, had been slammed shut. In that amount of time, if you drove straight north, you could reach Canada. If you headed south, you could hit Philadelphia or even Baltimore. A huge impossible net, so to speak, to toss out and pull back in. I mean, Tammy could be anywhere. Patricia's world collapsed in that moment. She immediately called the Exeter PD, and within an hour the search for Tammy was on. But they were already fighting against time and against the gathering darkness of a November evening, against the terrible reality that in cases like these, every minute matters, and they missed a lot of them. About 75 firefighters, police officers, and volunteers mobilized as quickly as they could. A Coast Guard helicopter swept overhead while searchers combed through the woods on foot. They used boats to search along the banks of the river that runs through town and directly behind the Belanger family home. When they left, no stone unturned, but who knows how many stones were actually out there. They knocked on doors, searched backyards and buildings, looked for any sign of disturbed earth in the woods. In the end, they recovered nothing that belonged to Tammy, not a piece of clothing, not her distinctive red backpack, not a single trace that she had even headed out that morning. As the days rolled over into weeks, the search expanded. Police seized an entire street's worth of trash and painstakingly combed through it at the town's highway department. They opened manhole covers, searched dumpsters, drained rivers and ponds. The FBI joined the investigation, bringing in additional resources and expertise. No sign of Tammy. Thanksgiving came with an empty seat at the Belanger family table, and Christmas gifts sat, wrapped and waiting for a little girl who might never come home to open them. And Tammy's 9th birthday that February passed in agonizing silence. But just when it seemed like the case might fade into the cold files of unsolved mysteries, something happened that would change everything. In late December of '84, WCVB-TV in Boston broke a story that quickly spread all the way across the country. The police had officially identified a suspect in Tammy's disappearance, a 41-year-old man named Victor Weddy. An auto body repairman, Victor Wanetti, was named as a suspect, and Victor just so happened to have been living in a motel in nearby New Hampshire at the time the girl vanished. That's the very next town over. Wenye had been arrested on a parole violation. Police chatted with him about Tammy, and whatever he said obviously didn't sit right with them. But beyond that, well, this guy wasn't just any parole. And Victor's past was dark. And in 1979, well, he was convicted of assailing his 13-year-old stepdaughter, something that had started when she was only 8. Now, he'd served just 4 years of a possible 15 before being let out in '83. But it gets worse. Earlier that year, he'd been arrested down in Florida for prowling, caught peeping into homes where kids live. That broke his parole, sending him back to New Hampshire State Prison. So, this guy was exactly the kind of person you wouldn't want in your town. And you certainly wouldn't want him talking to your 8-year-old daughter when she was walking alone to school. Does his past mean he did it? No, but you can see how he ended up in the middle of Tammy's case. On top of all this, Victor was also being investigated in connection with another missing child case, an 8-year-old girl named Marjorie Luna, who had vanished from Green Acres, Florida, only 6 months before Tammy disappeared. And the similarities between the two cases were impossible to ignore. Both girls were 8 years old, and both had been walking alone near their homes when they vanished, and Victor had been living in the area of both disappearances at the time they occurred. Now, to really understand what investigators were dealing with, we need to dig into Victor's background, and it's a journey into the mind of someone who spent decades preying on children. Born in Pennsylvania in 1943, Victor had racked up at least 30 burglary convictions across New England by the time he was in his 30s, but burglary wasn't his only crime, and in July of '73, the 8-year-old daughter of a girlfriend was the first to tell police that this man was inappropriately touching her. His attorney managed to get the charges dropped by claiming the child couldn't distinguish fantasy from reality. So, way to go on that lawyer. Really nice. They got the win under their belt, and who cares what the truth was? And then, as if following direct instructions from the book Lolita, Victor married the child's mother a few months later. Now he had constant access to the girl as her stepfather. As you can imagine, what he did to her got much worse. By the time she was 11, the injuries she was sustaining were so severe she needed hospital care. This had gone on for years, and every once in a while the girl would show up to the police station in tears. But she was always too scared and traumatized to say exactly what was really going on. Now her mom claimed she never knew what was happening, even though Victor later admitted she had caught them together on multiple occasions. It wasn't until June of '79, when the girl was 13, that her mother finally saw something that was impossible to ignore, reported him to the police. But Victor's depravity didn't stop there. He had taken photos of the girl in compromising positions, a little keepsake for himself. Now, he was trying to use those images to blackmail prosecutors into dropping the case entirely by threatening to release them publicly. During the trial, he even sent love letters to the victim and made obscene gestures at her from the defendant's table. When it came time for sentencing, this animal showed zero remorse. Instead, he asked the judge why he was being crucified for something he claimed wasn't even a crime. After serving just 4 years, he was paroled in July of '83 with the condition that he stay in New Hampshire. But within months, he broke that parole by moving to Florida, where his parents had retired in Lake Worth. On May 7th of 1984, Palm Beach County sheriff's officers arrested a man for prowling after an off-duty police sergeant saw him looking into the windows of a home. Now, the man claimed he was just looking for a lost cat and gave a fake New Hampshire address. It was Victor. He posted $250 bail and was released the next day. Less than 3 weeks later, that's when 8-year-old Marjorie disappeared from her neighborhood in Green Acres, less than 15 miles from where Victor had been arrested. Marjorie had been a shy child just like Tammy. Her parents had divorced when she was a baby, and she lived with her mother, Jenny, an older sister. That Memorial Day weekend, the family had taken a road trip and returned home tired, and Jenny put on a movie, Yellow Submarine by the Beatles, and everyone settled in for naps. Around 2:30 that afternoon, Marjorie became concerned about her mama cat and her kittens, Boo Boo and Steer. She took some bottles for recycling and walked the 450 from her house to Belk's Corner Store, a 2-minute walk that she had made countless times before. A clerk at the store told investigators that the girl bought a bag of cat food and went outside where other children were playing with fireworks they had purchased. Several witnesses then told police they saw Hispanic men described to be 5'6" to 5'8", with a medium build, talking with Marjorie. Outside the store, the man had offered her money to go inside and buy fireworks. He was driving a faded blue car. Witnesses said it was a blue sedan with a broken tail light and Florida license plates. That same description would later surface in Tammy's case, but no one saw Marjorie leave with the man or anybody else. She simply vanished, just like Tammy would 6 months later. Music back in Exeter. Police had pieced all this together, and from that, theorized about what had happened to Tammy, and this is why Victor was named the prime suspect. They believe he had returned to New Hampshire after that arrest down south, and his parole officer found him a job at Brad's Auto Body Shop on Main Street in Exeter, literally just around the corner from where Tammy lived on River Street, and he was supposed to report to work at 7 a.m. every single morning. And guess what happened on November 13th? Well, Victor didn't show up for work around noon, for hours after Tammy was last seen crossing the street by that neighbor. He called in sick. His boss, Brad Bissell, thought he had probably been out late the night before and was sleeping it off. So, pretty perfect timing here. And Tammy was last seen at approximately 8 a.m. and Victor doesn't call in sick until noon. What exactly was he doing during those 4 critical hours? According to investigators, Victor's blue 1975 Oldsmobile with Florida license plates and a broken tail light was spotted in the area where Tammy disappeared. Now remember, this is the same description witnesses gave of the car seen near where Marjorie vanished in Florida, and 2 days after Tammy disappeared, Victor's parole officer notified local police that the convicted offender was working in Exeter. The police before that had no idea. There was no Central Registry of Offenders in 1984. No way for local departments to know that a predator was living and working in their community. When detectives contacted Brad at the auto body shop, they asked him how Victor was as an employee and had he done anything odd or acted strange. When Brad went on to tell them that on the day after Tammy disappeared, Victor seemed to be off in a world of his own. During lunch, for instance, he just stood by himself rubbing his key against the hood of his car. Psycho. 6 days after Tammy vanished, FBI agents brought Victor in for questioning. Right after that, he immediately tried to cover his tracks. He told the manager of the motel he was staying at that if anyone came asking to tell them she saw his blue Oldsmobile parked there all morning on November 13th. Police tore through his motel room, his car, the surrounding grounds, even the dumpster, hunting for any sign of Tammy. Scrap of clothing, a red backpack, anything that could tie Victor to her disappearance. But even with all this stuff, the suspicious behavior and timing, and the strong connection to 2 missing girls, the prosecutors didn't have enough hard evidence to charge Victor with either disappearance. The story might have ended there with him serving his time for the parole violation, while 2 families wondered what happened to their daughters. But in January of 1991, after serving 6 years, Victor was released and he immediately returned to Florida. And you're not going to believe what happened next. Detectives in Florida working with investigators from New Hampshire put our boy Victor under intense surveillance. They knew about the 2 missing girls and believed he was involved. They were determined to catch him in the act and figured it was only a matter of time before he slipped up. So, the surveillance operation was pretty huge. 40 officers using high-tech equipment and marked vans and tracking devices videotaped Victor's movements, hoping he would provide them with more information about his crimes and methods. What they discovered was even more horrifying than they had ever imagined. Victor was leaving his parents' house in Lake Worth before 5 a.m. every single day to drive to Woodhaven Plaza Park. From there, he would walk to a housing complex and position himself outside the bedroom window of 3 young sisters, a 9-year-old and 10-year-old twins. For weeks, Investigators videotaped him returning to that suburban duplex 14 times in less than 3 weeks. He would pleasure himself while looking through 3-inch gaps in the window blinds. He would press his face against the glass so hard that his breath would fog the window. And it didn't stop there. Police followed him to other locations where he would watch children at playgrounds, bus stops, many golf courses, and community swimming pools. He would slide down low in his car and just watch, always looking for opportunities to see young girls. The tracking device on his car led officers to a Memorial Day episode in North Florida where Victor was following children through neighborhoods. Detectives believed he was looking for an opportunity to snatch a vulnerable child, one walking alone just like Tammy and Marjorie had been. On June 4th, after weeks of keeping an eye on him, the net finally closed around. He was arrested walking back to his car at Woodhaven Plaza after another morning of voyeurism, completely unaware that 40 officers had been watching his every move for months. When police searched his belongings, they found what prosecutors would later call a collection of trophies. There were girls' underwear, class photos stolen from homes, children's underwear advertisements carefully cut out from store flyers, and scrapbooks filled with images of young girls, including celebrities like Sel Moonfry, who played Punky Brewster, and Brooke Shields. The state's attorney's office filed -1 counts of burglary and possession of burglary tools. Because of his extensive criminal history, prosecutors tried him as a habitual offender, which meant he could face 30 years for each burglary charge. Throughout that trial, 2 mothers sat in the courtroom desperate for answers that might never come. With 23 prior convictions, Victor was finally declared a danger to society. The judge gave him the maximum sentence allowed under the habitual offender law, 75 years. A local auto body repairman, Victor Wanetti, was long a suspect, but there was not enough physical evidence to charge him. After his death in late 2013 while serving time in Florida for other convictions, there was hope that someone might talk. It was a good thing he was back behind bars and wouldn't get out. But back in New Hampshire, the Belanger family was struggling to pick up the pieces. The weight of Tammy's disappearance had literally torn them apart. Patricia and Nelson eventually divorced. The family, once whole, was now shattered by grief and the unsolved mystery. As the years passed, Tammy's case remained officially open, but active investigation had essentially stopped. The new leads were few and far between, but physical evidence was limited. Without a body, without witnesses to an actual abduction, prosecutors knew they could never build a case strong enough to bring charges. And through it all, investigators continue to believe that Victor was responsible for both Tammy's and Marjorie's disappearances, and their parents probably do too. But believing something and proving it in court are two very different things. If there's someone out there that might hear us or see us talking about it that has a change of heart, I welcome a phone call and we'd follow up as fast and as hard as we can. This man finally died in 2012, taking all his secrets with him. Well, leaving everyone with the same question that's haunted us for 40 years. Where are Tammy and Marjorie? So, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Every Town. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you do like these types of stories, we got a whole bunch of other ones, so go check them out. Remember to come back next week for another episode of Every Town filled with strange and mysterious stories, because you never know, maybe your town will be next.